look, on behalf of the iMoot team, just want to thank everyone for being here today, being part of iMoot. And we have a presentation today from Joyce. This is a repeat session. And just going to mute your microphone, Joyce. So everyone, I think, probably knows Joyce. She does all sorts of things in e-learning and with the company Academic Tribe. And look, she certainly knows her stuff, and it's just a real pleasure and an honour to have her here with the iMoot and sharing again. And I just love the fact you've gone with the whole superhero theme. So looking forward to this presentation, Joyce, and hand over to you.
All right. Thanks, Shane, and thanks for having me again. And sorry, everyone, for the sound problems earlier, but good to have everyone here and be doing it in a different time zone as well. I had my webcam going yesterday, but because I'm at the university today and things have been causing a little bit of trouble, I won't. But I did tweet a picture earlier of my view, which is quite stunning actually this morning here in Melbourne. So good morning from Melbourne, and yeah, I'm going to be talking about some learner experience powers, and because I just love this conference theme, I went with designing a new superhero who I've decided to call Experience Girl. The first thing that you really need to know is that Experience Girl is hasn't really got any kind of superpowers, because the powers that she has are actually powers that anybody can get. And today I'll be sharing 10 of those powers with you. And in fact, being Experience Girl is a little bit of a recent alter ego for me as well. I've been a learning designer for about 17 years. I've worked in corporate training. I've worked in university and other settings. I've worked in the Netherlands and New Zealand and Australia now. And I've been doing learning design, and particularly design for online learning, for a really long time, since 1999. But I was getting a little bit frustrated with over the last few years with the fact that, you know, with all the possibilities that we've got, we always seem to kind of, you know, funnel into this lowest common denominator of just having the course site and then, you know, just adding some resources to it, maybe a few quizzes, maybe a few discussion forums. And what was interesting is that when I moved to Melbourne, I started hanging out with this startup scene and started to find out about user experience. And in fact, the more I found out about user experience design, the more I realized that there were a lot of things that we could borrow from user experience design. So I started to explore that really in the last 2 years. And so I'm going to share some of the things that are really easy techniques and that are really easy, you know, superpowers that you could be using kind of straight away. Now, if you want to be tweeting or if you want to be talking to me after this, then do connect with me on Twitter. I'm at @KatSujana, and for this presentation, if you're going to be tweeting, then use iMoot16 and also use LXDesign hashtag. Okay, here we go. So what is learner experience now? Yesterday, it's always great when you get to do these presentations 2 times in short succession, because you can iterate, which is actually one of the things that you need to do in experience design. And so yesterday I took a little bit of a long time in order to get through this, and we ran out of time for questions, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to try to go through this a little bit faster today. But what I want to start with is to think a little bit about kind of the nature of experience. Yesterday I held up my I think I'm getting a message from Shane. Okay. I'm not sure that I can, Shane.
You're muted, but then when it
disappears, it comes back in. Stop sharing your microphone. Okay, that might do it. Okay, so a little bit about the nature of experience then. Yesterday, what I did is I held up my iPhone Yesterday, I held up my iPhone to everyone to kind of, because it's something that we all carry with us, or a smartphone of some sort. It's something that we all carry with us. And the experience of owning an iPhone or a smartphone of some sort is not defined by the fact that you own an electronically powered piece piece of glass, right? The experience that you have through that device actually transcends the material. It actually takes you beyond what that piece of glass could actually do. And that's a little bit what I think, if you start thinking about what learning experiences is, learning experience that we're trying to design isn't defined by the tools and the resources and, in a way, the touch interfaces that we set up. It is actually defined by what happens inside the learner, what the experience that the learner actually engages in, not the artifacts that they interact with. And so I think that's an interesting kind of proposition. And this is a quote from Mark Hackensaw, who's written a book called Experience Design: Technology for All the Right Reasons. It's a great read, and it's not very long, but it's a great little book to kind of get you thinking about the nature of experience. And experience is not just digital experiences. He actually starts his book by talking about the experience that he had at a restaurant. So experience is kind of everywhere. And if you want to think about that, and I was starting to kind of struggle to think about how I was going to share this with other people, but what happens, and I came across this diagram, which is actually based on a customer experience pyramid, but basically where they talked about, and that customer experience pyramid had been designed for enterprise software systems. But I thought this actually translates quite well to how we kind of can think about the experiences. And I think, and one of the interesting things is that about midway up the pyramid, you can see this kind of convenience layer. And what they said about that in the research is that it's actually quite difficult for enterprise software systems to actually go across that line, to pass the line of convenience to delivering pleasurable and meaningful experiences. And I thought, there's good parallels here to design learning experiences, which is that quite often we kind of get stuck in those lower regions around, like it's functional, it'll do the job, but it's not the most convenient system in the world. It's not the most convenient experience that students have. And what you really want to do is to go up and try to cross that convenient layer so that you can actually start looking at transformational learning experience. I think one of the really interesting things there is that pleasurable
layer, which is where people have a memorable.
Oh, I see that my microphone has come back. I'm just trying to turn it off again. Where people have a memorable experience worth sharing, and this is actually something that is quite common in for people to actually measure when they are trying to design digital experiences, which is that they ask for a Net Promoter Score, and the Net Promoter Score is all about asking your users, would you recommend this to someone else? And so that, the point where an experience becomes worth sharing is actually a very important part. How often do you think your students have an experience in the learning design that you've set up where, they can't wait to tell somebody else about it? So I think that's a really interesting idea to strive for. And I'm doing some work with some of the people at Michigan State University about, how do you get to meaningful learning experiences? And so, when I started to think about a learner experience design, at first I was really looking at, what can we borrow from user experience design? And these are two names that you'll probably recognize, Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen, who've done a lot of work on user testing and how people use websites. So, but Don Norman is actually, kind of like the father of modern design. And they basically talk about user experience design as needing to meet the exact needs of the customer without fuss and without bother. And so user experience design could be a great place for us, learning designers who are now trying to design these complex digital experiences to draw from. But there are other design disciplines that we can be doing, that we can be learning from as well. I already talked about experience design. It's almost taking a wider view. It's saying not just digital experiences, not just product experiences, but really any kind of experience. And again, this is from Mark Hackensaw's book, in which he says that, experience isn't simple. It comes from intertwined works of perception, action, motivation, emotion, and cognition, in dialogue with the world. Not one context, but lots of different contexts and lots of different systems. And I think that's certainly recognizable when you think about kinds of learning experiences that we are creating these days, which go, from the campus to the home, to the workplace, that have to transcend face-to-face to digital, to mobile devices. So I think I think experience design can just be this really rich field that we can learn from. And one of the other design disciplines that I've been looking at is human-centered design. In fact, if you haven't looked at it, we're just wrapping up the human-centered design course that was being offered. It's like a MOOC that was being offered by IDEO and Acumen, and which has been just really, really great. It's a wonderful example of learning design, and it's a wonderful example of learner experience design. But human-centered design is, again, something that really focuses. Human-centered design is something that really focuses on the human that is at the center of the experience. And what I like here is that Don Norman says, when we design, even when things are complex, it shouldn't mean that we must live in continual frustration. And then one of the other things that I've been thinking about that is probably quite common in what we do as learning designers is that that often we aren't actually designing just for the end user, just for the learner. I know for myself that when I'm designing, I often design a course or a solution in such a way that, yes, it will work for the learner, but also that it's actually achievable for the person who is going to be, the person or the team that is going to be in charge of delivering that experience and facilitating that experience. And when you start to think about, how an organization and the actors in that organization are going to be part of the whole experience, that is what's known as service design thinking. And so I think there's actually quite a lot that we can do by looking at service design and what kind of techniques that we can actually bring into our work, into our learning design work from there. One of the things that all of these things have in common is that they have particular methodologies that they follow, and those are quite rigorous. And the other thing is that they all start from a point of empathy for the user. So they really focus on getting to know the user, in our case, the learner, and also any subject matter experts or any teachers or associate staff who are going to be involved with that, and really getting to know them and really getting to understand their world and what the learning experience is like for them. I'll just skip past this one and go on to this quote by Indy Young, who wrote a great book about empathy and how you can empathize with not just your users, but actually it's also about just empathy in the workplace. But basically she starts by saying that empathy is a noun, it is a thing, it is an understanding that you develop about another person. Empathizing is the use of that understanding, it's an action. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, which is that you really need to develop empathy first before you can go and put it into action. One thinking about, do we maybe need to go about the work that we do in a different way? There are several other people who've been looking at this. Eileen Scanlon in 2013 called for, a design science for education, that we need better, principled working practices. And Diana Lorillard, who you'll know from the conversational framework, also wrote a book about teaching as a design science. However, I think, and Peter Goodyear, Professor Peter Goodyear here in Sydney, has also been saying that, we need to be more rigorous about the design that we do when we design these learning solutions. What's interesting with all of those books, though, is that, well, perhaps with the exception of Eileen Scanlon, is that most of them think that this can be solved by simply upskilling academic staff in design thinking and other design sciences. And I just keep thinking that design is actually, if you look at how design is done in other contexts, design is done by teams. It is not something that is done by an individual. It is actually more than just one individual understanding what design is. It is about having the right processes and the right teams to actually put things in place. So if you say design is going to be important in the learning design work that we do, then we may need to start thinking about, maybe having different teams that work on learning solutions. Another important thing I think to realize is that an experience, we can design for experience, but we can't design the experience. And that is because any experience is always co-created. It is created by the people that offer the experience and then by the participants in that experience. And a good example of this is, for instance, a book. So last year I was really lucky to go to the Melbourne Writers Festival and hear Eleanor Catton, who wrote The Luminaries, and she talks about the purpose of reading. And in it, she mentioned how, any piece of writing, is done by the author, yes, but the reader actually shapes it as well by their imagination, their memories, their intelligence, and their disposition. And I think it's exactly the same for any kind of learning experience that we design, is that, yes, we have an idea about how that is going to work, but we can't control it. We can't control the frame of mind that the learner is in when they come to it. We can't control all of the conditions around them. And this is just the nature of experience. And Liz Sanders, who's a professor at Ohio State University, says that experience people, and you can't design it for someone else. However, you can design for experiencing. So we can create experiences, or we can create the conditions for experience that will more likely facilitate that transformational experience, that experience that is higher up that pyramid to happen. Okay, so having said that, I think it's time for us to get stuck in and for me to share some of those superpowers. When you think about experience design and the process of experience design, there is a common model that comes back time and time again, and that is this double diamond. The design double diamond is ubiquitous. You can see it everywhere. I've tried to adapt it a little bit for the work that we do. But basically, it is characterized by two processes that diverge and then converge. In the first diamond that you see there, what you would be trying to do is you would be trying to go from having a general challenge that you're trying to design for. So let's say this course needs to go online. To actually going to a specific set of challenge. And the way that you would do that is you would try to find out as much as you can about the challenge and about, all of the different sub-challenges that are inside that larger challenge of this course must go online. And then what you try to do is you try to go into one specific challenge and kind of converge into one specific challenge that you'll actually design for. The next bit then, the next diamond, takes you through a similar process, but this time what you're doing is you're trying to research and develop, a number of different solutions that you could implement in order to solve for that challenge. And then what you do in the second half of that diamond is you actually end up picking one and then iterating until you have a solution that's actually going to work. So that's the nature of the double diamond. And all of the processes that I'm going to be talking to you are kind of fit into that double diamond process somewhere. So the first superpower that you have, and we all have this, is that you can listen to your users. And that means, your learners, but also your subject matter experts and the other people who are involved. And the way that you can do that is there's, any number of ways of doing user research, but two really common ways that you can kind of start with straight away are user interviews and and user observations, or learner observations and learner interviews. So one of the things that I actually started to think as I started to do like user interviews was that all of these years I've actually been going into subject matter expert meetings the wrong way. I should have had an interview guide with me all along. Quite often I would get, trapped into this, we'll just meet every 2 weeks, and then the meetings were pleasant and they were good, but I feel that a lack of formality maybe made it seem like this was a, quite an informal process behind it. I think that when you create an interview guide and when you prepare the other person that you will be interviewing, I think suddenly everything just comes into focus, and people really start to kind of focus on the purpose of the work that you're trying to do together. So I think, if there's anything that you take away from today, guide for yourself and see if some of the meetings that you have should actually be more formal user interviews. There's a few guidelines there about things that you can do in order to both in order to prepare for your user interviews, things that you can do during your interviews. I think asking why is really, really strong. Sorry, Tabitha. Thank you for letting me know. Asking why is really important, and I think what you'll find is that if you ask why and then ask it again and then ask it again, you will suddenly start to uncover problems that are there that can that otherwise you wouldn't have. So, for instance, we were asked to look at someone's program site and see what we could do with it, and basically we said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, it's pretty ugly. And then if you say, oh, why do you think it's ugly? They say, oh, well, because it's just gray and it's just bland. And you say, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Well, these words here on the left don't really describe what it is that's inside there. Like, oh, well, okay, well, now we're getting here. Why doesn't it describe it? What should it say? And so as you keep asking, you'll actually start to uncover more and more things that you could be solving and getting closer to the actual problem. One of the other things that you can do is actually just go quiet. And the number of times that I've done a user interview, and then just as I kind of close it off, I say, is there anything else that you'd like to share? People go quiet, and then all of a sudden they come out with this great gem. So user interviews are a very powerful superpower that you can kind of start to do right away. Sometimes interviews can feel confrontational, or people can be intimidated by them. A great thing to do, for instance, an alternative for actually listening to your users is maybe to do some learner observation. So maybe get them to actually do a task, perform a task, and watch them as they do it, and ask them to talk out loud as they're going through it. In the example that you see here, we actually did a slightly different thing. We actually asked people to draw the kind of home page for their program site that they would like to see. And all of a sudden, they had a clear view in their mind's eye of what it is that they wanted. And the things that they were saying to us as they were describing that were actually, disclosing a lot more about what they wanted out of that site. They wanted events. They wanted the students to know about the events. They wanted the students to easily find the support that they needed. But when we were asking them to walk us through their actual course program site, none of that stuff was coming out because they were focusing on the little details of the existing situation. So sometimes just taking people out of that situation can be really helpful as well. All right, empathy mapping. There's another technique that you can start to do straight away. And this would be usually closely associated with doing some user interviews because you actually need some insights in order to do empathy mapping. But empathy mapping is a very common UX technique for actually starting to think about what it is that your users, your learners are thinking and feeling, what is it that they are hearing, what are some of the messages that they're getting as they are going through the experience. And this is particularly helpful if you're trying to iterate on a course that maybe you've already designed, right? Because if they've already got something, then it's really easy to do some user interviews and find out, what is happening for those students as they're actually going through that course. There's plenty of resources on empathy mapping that you can find online. But if you wanted an example of a very simple empathy mapping exercise that you could do is what you would want to do is you would capture the observation from your user interviews just on Post-its, very simple, one idea per Post-it, and then find yourself an empathy template. Create a large map on a large piece of paper, and it's ideal if you can actually leave it somewhere on the wall because it's great to refer back to. And then as a group your post-its on the quadrants in the map. And I think it's really important at this point, not just to do it quietly and let everyone do their own thing, but actually to stand around the map as a group and talk as you're putting things up. What are people saying? And really listen to what the others are saying, because that's the only way that you're going to share those insights. You know, as informative as those post-its are, they're only really powerful when you know kind of the background of what went behind it. All right, translate your findings into personas. Because not everyone in your team or not everyone who's going to be involved in developing the learning experience may necessarily be part of that initial user research. You actually need a way to capture all of that information that is more easily shareable and more easily actionable, and that's where personas come in. So personas are basically almost like archetypes of the different types of learner that you're going to have in your course. Really interesting, a project that I'm working on currently. They've cracked the data, and they found out that despite the fact that everyone was convinced that most of the cohort for their program was actually students, that most of the students there were school leavers, and so there was always a really heavy emphasis on designing learning experiences that were suitable for school leavers. Once we actually cracked the data on this project, and it's great to have data wranglers on your project if you can get them on board straight away, was that only a third of the students were school leavers, which means 2/3 are not school leavers and probably need and are looking for a different type of experience. And so a persona is not necessarily it shouldn't reflect one person in your course, but what it should do is kind of show the different archetypes that you have in your course. So for this project, we might end up creating, yes, one persona that is a school leaver, but also another persona that is perhaps someone who is re-entering the workforce, and perhaps someone who is at the end of their career and is simply looking to have an intellectual challenge. So those would be 3 different personas, and they would have 3 different attributes. They would have different time availabilities. They would have different digital skills, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the types of things that you want to capture in your persona. Again, there are lots of different ways that you can capture a persona, but this is one that we've been using, and this one actually shows some common things that you would find. What you try to do is you try to actually give them an evocative name so that it becomes easy throughout the project to refer back to it. Remember, these persona are meant as shorthand to make sure that everyone on the design team keeps in mind who it is that you're designing for, even if they weren't involved in the user research process up front. So you would have an evocative name. A picture always helps. This idea of a little quote, a little takeaway, that should really tell you the one thing that is important about this persona. And then other common things that you might find is like this kind of little bio, or maybe a day in the life of type story, and also goals. What are the goals of this learner? What is the experience of this learner? And what are some of the pain points that they have? Now, something else that you can start to do almost immediately is, and I think this is a really important part of any kind of experience design work, is to actually facilitate group inputs. You can do this at any point, and the exercise that I want to share with you today is this idea of affinity diagramming. And I put it here at this point in the process, but really you can be doing this from anywhere from a brainstorm to gathering interview data in lots of different processes. It's basically just a great simple exercise for making sure that you get to hear all of the voices in the room and that everyone's ideas are collected. Basically what you would do is you would get everyone to write down ideas or problems or issues on Post-its, 1 idea per Post-it, 5 to 7 words per post, and write big. And then what you would ask the group to do is to actually go and post up, 1 Post-it at a time, the thing that they want to say, and to read it out loud for everyone, and to kind of explain the thinking behind it as well. And you would keep going round and round the group until you've basically got everything out. And then you would start to put it all into themes. What? Oh, sorry. And then you would try to find all of the themes and group them so that you can actually start to see what are some of the different issues or what are some of the different larger problems that we're finding here and that we're identifying here. And you'll also quickly see one of the nice things is that there's a little bit of visual reinforcement, which is that, you know, if there are a lot of post-its in one area, that's probably something that is preying on a lot of people's minds, and so therefore may need something that may, you know, rather than when there's like one lone post-it or two lone post-its. It is a bit intense, and it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. But one of the things that this can help you do is then also decide what you're actually going to work on, right? So once you get to this point where you've got all of these different themes, you can then have like almost like a democratic voting process where you give everyone little stickers, say 5 each, and people then actually just vote for the theme that they actually want to go and work on. So, you know, very simple group facilitation technique that you'll find that you'll go back to it time and time again when you run these types of workshops. One of the other superpowers you've got is you can help people articulate a problem statement. What is a problem statement? It is basically a statement that helps you to identify the problem that one of your persona might have. And what it does is it helps get everyone in your design team thinking about the problem in the same way. So let's take a group project here, and we'll go back to Anxious Emma. I am Anxious Emma. I'm not great with computers. I've got 2 kids that I work with at home, or that I look after at home, and I've got and I'm trying to do this group project. But I'm finding it really difficult because my group members are never online. This makes me feel frustrated. So if Emma is time poor and she's really keen to get, you know, her work done quickly, and therefore a group project can become a real problem. So having defined the problem statement, it then gives you some really good ideas about, you know, you and your design team, some really good ideas about how you can actually go about addressing that problem. What are things that you can put into place that would make it easier for someone like Emma to achieve that outcome? Are there things we can do about timing? Are there things we can do about accountability? Yes, Shane, it is similar to a Scrum story. Sorry, that was referring to the previous thing. So ask, how might we? That's another thing that you can do and that you can start to do straight away. If you have looked at design thinking, this will look familiar to you. If you haven't looked at design thinking, the Stanford Design School actually makes all of its workshop materials, etc., available freely online. You can go there and you can download any of their resources. And they've been a big proponent of this idea of the how might we question. And the how might we question is basically about changing, and the people that you're working with, about approaching a problem from several different ways. So rather than kind of jumping to a regular solution, and we've done some workshops on this, and it's been really interesting because it turns out that people who are more experienced learning designers are very solution focused. We're like, yeah, we already know how to solve this. And so it's really interesting trying to kind of harness that and not let it go and not jump to solutions almost straight away. But basically, a how might we question is approaching a problem from several different pieces. So this example here, for instance, talks about, you know, a mother with 3 kids who's rushing through the airport. She has to then wait at the gate, and she wants to entertain her children because she doesn't want her annoying little brat to irritate other passengers who are there. So how could you approach this from different points of view, right? You could amp up the good, use the kids' energy to entertain fellow passengers. You could remove the bad. Is there a way that you can separate the kids from fellow passengers? Can you change the status quo? Can you make playful, loud kids less annoying, etc.? So it just gives you different ways of going at a problem from different angles. And this is great, particularly if you work in an environment where people just tend to design courses the same way all the time with a similar outcome. This is a great way for, you know, even if you can just do it for like half an hour, it's just a great way for getting people to just think about that problem in a different way. Big proponent of starting to draw and starting to sketch in your meetings. because the idea is you don't want to be doing, like, as a learner experience designer, it sounds like you're the designer, but you're actually the facilitator of the design process. And so it's important that you actually get everyone's ideas out as soon as possible so that everybody else can be shooting at it, right?
And if you're a little bit
worried about not being able to draw, this isn't about being able to draw. It's actually about just being able to communicate visually. And this is a slide from a sketchnote artist who's written a whole handbook about sketchnoting. His name's Mike Rhodes. And he basically asserts that, everything that you want to draw can be created with 5 simple elements: a triangle, a line, and a dot. If you can draw those, then you can draw anything. And really the best way to do that is to carry a notebook with you, carry some markers with you, and just, start doodling in your meetings, etc. Once you get comfortable with that, one way that you can apply that is by starting to draw storyboards. Draw storyboards, and if possible, draw them live. Don't draw the storyboard and then take it to people, but draw it live in a workshop with the other people that you're designing with, so that they can be iterating on the storyboard that you're developing, the story that you're trying to tell about the steps that the user, your learner, is going to go through. Start taking that, one panel at a time. The student does this, and now the student does this. And you'll find that that it actually facilitates that design conversation that is so needed, where the teacher goes, oh, but I don't want them to do that at that point. Okay, well, how else should it go? So sketchnoting and storyboarding, get your ideas out as soon as possible, and make sure that it's out there in a way that people can actually start to give you feedback on it. Mapping the learning journey. Journey mapping is a very powerful technique for actually getting into some of the detail of the experience that you're trying to create. You'll find that there are several techniques that are very similar, but they're called slightly different because they've got slightly different perspectives or very slightly different emphasis. Journey mapping tends to focus more on the emotional needs of the learner. Scenario mapping would focus more on the narrative needs of the experience that you're trying to design for, and whereas the design blueprint is a little more functional. Here's an example of a journey map for a program called Keep Graduates Green. This was all about enrolling students to volunteer on a project where they would basically take a pledge to be green on campus. But a journey map doesn't always need to look this nice and shiny. This one is slightly different. This one is also about people signing up for groups and forming into groups. But really, if you don't have any graphic design skills, that's fine, because the value of journey mapping is not so much in the final deliverable. That's great for talking about your project later, but the value of journey mapping is really in the process of journey mapping. You can either use journey mapping when you are trying to evaluate an existing product or object or service or course that you've got. You can also do it kind of in a almost like a prototyping way for a new product or service that you're going to be designing for. Now I'll just skip through this because I'm aware of the time, because I just want to talk you through how it works. You basically map out the learner path and touch points at first, and the touch point is any time that the learner interacts with the experiences that you've designed. So whether that's a tutorial, whether that's going into the LMS, whether it's downloading an app that they have to interact with, all of those things are individual touch points. What you then want to do is you want to actually map the other stakeholders and channels and identify their paths as well. So this could be your teacher, this could be your library, this could be your support services. And then what you'll find is that you're starting to discover that there are different distinct interaction phases. And so this would be, for instance, the initial phase could be, how do students even find out about your program? And then the next bit is, how do they enroll for your program, and what are the different steps that they go through? And then you'll find that for some of those touch points, you'll start to identify emotions, which is like, students get really frustrated here, the teacher gets really frustrated here, but they all seem to really love this. And from identifying those emotions, you then have the opportunity to actually identify some opportunities and barriers. What are some of the barriers that you might be able to take away? What are some of the opportunities that are there for actually improving the learning experience incrementally? And again, this is an iterative process. So what you could do is it would help, you might identify 5 barriers that say, well, if we remove this one, that's actually the most bang for our buck. Okay, that's enough about learner journey mapping, because I want to make sure that I get through some of the other stuff. But I have included things in the slides if you wanted to take a look at one of the projects that we've done. Finally, second to last, is create prototypes. And this doesn't need to be really high end, but basically the idea is, what is the minimum that you can rapidly create? What is the minimum that you can create that you can get in front of people, get some feedback, and create a new prototype? And then once you get the feedback, actually create a new prototype. It can be really lo-fi. It doesn't really need to be very high end. Just sketching it out for people in even just a few panels, just so that they can see what it is that's going on. In fact, if you produce high fidelity wireframes, something like this, for instance, it can kind of mislead the people that you're working with to think that, oh, this is already set in stone, we can't change this anymore. It's also really time consuming. So at any point, until you're actually quite clear about what it is that you're going to design, I would always opt for these kind of low fidelity hand-drawn frames before I would go into these more high fidelity, which are great about for actually doing some production. And then finally, I would like to encourage you to design across the gaps. I think quite often when we get asked to come onto a project, we are asked to only focus on one part of it, help us set up our Moodle. But I think when you start to think about the work that we do more in terms of experience design, we can't go in and only focus on one aspect of that total learner experience. We actually need to consider all of the spaces and activities where that learner experience actually takes place. That student is going to have a personal learning network. How can we facilitate that coming into the learning that they do? That student is going to go to lectures. That student is going to go to tutorials. There might be mobile applications that they use, support services, and then there's also the course side. How do we design across the gaps between all of those different spaces? Okay, so that's really quick. And we did have a few niggles at the top, but I'm happy to talk more about learner experience design. We had a great discussion as a result of the slides that I posted on my Facebook yesterday with a group of people. People who said, I'm not sure, I'm not comfortable with the idea of experience design, I'm not comfortable with the idea of thinking about our learners as our users. I'm happy to have all of those conversations, because it is something that we're just trying to figure out. And there are lots of places that we are talking about this. We have got a blog at lxdesign.co, and we're always looking for contributions. So if you've got some strong feelings or some strong ideas, or maybe you've got some examples of work that you've been doing, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, with that, I'm happy to take 1 or 2 questions before I know everybody has to either get off to work or go off to the next session. Perhaps best to type any questions into the chat window, because I don't think I'll be able to hear you. Shane, re your point about developers being on the journey. Absolutely, I think it's really important to have your developers part of the journey right from the start. And not everybody can be doing all the work, but being able to at least involve people in the process, be aware of what it is that you're trying to do, and also be involved in developing some of those interview guides. What is it that we actually need to find out? I think can be really, really helpful. When you do interviews, what I've found is it's best to get like 1 or 2 out of the way, because you'll find that with the questions that you're asking and the answers that you're getting, you then have an opportunity to you then have an opportunity to actually go back and tweak that interview guide because you're not quite getting from your interviews what you were looking for. Richard, do you think there are design patterns emerging in the design for experience space yet? Yeah, I think, well, do I think there are design patterns? I don't know. I know that here at RMIT, I think once we get more rigorous, our design. Oh, sorry, you lost me. So I think once we get more rigorous about how we design for things, we can be more rigorous about actually the classifying the designs that we create. I'm not quite. I think we went some way perhaps when we started to coin terms like XMOOCs and CMOOCs, but those are really big classifications. I think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind though about trying to define those design patterns. But I think with any experience, there's always going to be like maybe the larger pattern that you try to implement, that you try to learn from, and then the smaller on-location tweaking that you end up having to do. And Shane, yeah, developers do need to know different stuff from the designers. I was really impressed with some of the work that I saw in the user experience space, where some of the final steps in trying to hand over the work to the developers really came into drawing those user flows that are so important, and quite cool to see actually how all of the work that we do up front with the user research, et cetera, can then kind of be distilled into these really quite functional diagrams that then tell or ask developers or give developers the guidelines for starting to actually build the projects. It's very interesting. Eye-opening, I would say.
Well, let me just quickly jump in and just say on behalf of the iMoot team, Joyce, thank you very much for presenting. Very much enjoyed that, and a lot in there to take away, I think, for everybody. So thank you for your time and all your experience that you bring to this as well.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And it was a little bit distracting. I felt a little bit distracting because I could see that there were sound issues, but I hope it was helpful anyway. And hoping to continue the conversation. Thanks, Shane, and thanks everyone for coming along this morning.